We're joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. Good to have you here. You have spoken quite a bit this week about what USAID meant in your life, particularly when you were living in a refugee camp for 4 years. And USAID, you talked about helping to keep you alive. We know this week a federal judge will come to some kind of hearing and decision perhaps on what happens to all those government workers. Are the courts the main line of defense here?
Yeah, I mean, what we are witnessing is a constitutional crisis. We are seeing an executive branch that has decided that they are no longer going to abide by the Constitution in honoring Congress's role in the creation of the agencies, in their role in deciding where money is allocated. And so the only recourse we have, since our congressional leadership, the Speaker, will not stop the executive, is through the judiciary. And this is, you know, when you think about the checks and balances that we have, the courts are the only recourse we have at the moment. And we have seen, and when we talk about the illegality of what the executive is doing, we have seen every single executive order that has been challenged in the courts was found to be illegal. Wow. And that, I think, should give faith to the American people that our courts are working as they should. The checks and balances are working. What is not working is the way that the executive is behaving and the congressional leadership that is failing the American people.
Well, some of these court cases are ongoing, so we'll have to see where they end up.
The ones that have already been adjudicated, every single executive order has been halted at the moment by an order.
Many of them Republican judges who've also made that decision.
Trump-appointed judges.
It was interesting to hear Congressman McCall indicate that when it came to breaking up an agency that was enshrined in law, that maybe there is some resistance there. Senator Hagerty, however, thought that Congress would be supportive of dismantling USAID after I read that description of this statute. It seems, though, that Democrats don't have a lot of leverage here to push this argument forward in Congress. Do you think you do?
Well, they don't have the numbers in order to dismantle through Congress. That's why they are going through this illegal. That's why they're going through this illegal route. We know that USAID has support, not just with Democrats, but with Republicans. I can't see McCall taking a vote to dismantle USAID. You know, so we know that the votes are not there to dismantle the Department of Education. We know that the votes are not there to grant security clearances for them accessing Treasury. And so every single process that they are going through in implementing Trump's agenda is at the moment illegal. And they know they don't have the support for it in Congress. That's why they're not bringing it through Congress.
It's interesting that the first place to focus is such a small portion of federal spending to look at aid. But when you look at the popularity, Secretary Rubio was right in saying that it's getting harder to defend foreign aid because it's not popular. We saw the Chicago Council on Global Affairs surveyed American opinions on foreign policy, and they found a growing number want to reduce economic and military aid to other countries. So how do you convince the public that your point of view is the right one? Because it sounds like they're sliding the other way.
Well, foreign aid, I think, throughout the history of our country has not been popular with the American people because we don't have that many conversations about what it does, how much of it accounts for in our budget. A lot of people hear the millions, billions, and they don't fully have a concept of what that actually means, the lives it touches, and how important it is, both the soft power that we have as a country, how it keeps us competitive around the world, how it buys us goodwill. We can have the conversation, but when you just say foreign aid to a lot of people, they're thinking that we're sending bombs to other countries, which people like me and others oppose.
Right. an allegation we heard earlier in the program. I want to ask you about something President Trump said this week alongside the Israeli Prime Minister. It took many by surprise. Take a listen.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site.
The president said Palestinians would be permanently removed. How do you think this is heard and understood around the world?
Well, that's just plain out ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's what he's talking about. The Palestinian people will remain in Gaza. There is no support around the world for the ludicrous suggestion that he is making.
Well, he's saying give them a choice to leave, open the gates.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure most of the people in Gaza would love to remain in their homeland and be where they're born.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, we have to leave it there for today, but I appreciate you coming in. We'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation. Stay with us.
We just have a lot of unknowns, and it feels like no one has our backs. No one's been a voice for the small people. And if we're going to go out there and risk our lives, the least you could do is protect our, safety and our families.
That was an active FBI agent who spoke with CBS's Scott MacFarlane last week. The agent asked for anonymity due to safety concerns, including the risk that private information about the individual could be made public, a practice known as doxing. For more on that interview and the impact of the Trump administration's bureaucratic overhaul is Justice Department correspondent Scott MacFarlane. We're also joined by Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford, Homeland Security contributor Samantha Vinograd, and cybersecurity expert and analyst Chris Krebs. It's good to have you all here. And even just trying to whittle this down to exactly what to ask you was hard because there has been so much happening. Scott, let's talk on the very immediate thing that was raised in that interview. Physical security. You obtained an email from the acting FBI director that said he has concerns for the safety of personnel as well as risks to their families. What exactly does he have in mind and what's being done to protect them?
Let's take a moment to underscore the significance of that message. These are people who chase terrorists for a living, and there's an internal email they're worried about a unique form of retribution at this moment. That gives you an indication the turmoil the FBI is in at this moment. There are two types of retribution these agents are concerned about. First of all, as you mentioned, the doxing, that people are going to come after them, and they're concerned that the January 6th rioters, now lionized, now galvanized, or their supporters and sympathizers will come after the agents who are responsible for nearly 1,600 arrests. But more fundamentally, and perhaps more immediately, they're worried about retribution for doing their jobs, professional retribution, that there will be a purge, firings, forced resignations that are going to gut America's Joint Terror Task Force, Child Predator Task Forces, and violent crime units.
And just to be clear, FBI agents don't get to pick what assignments they get, just like the United States military does not get to pick it.
And this was not a Washington, D.C. investigation. This involved every field office of the FBI nationwide. They were assigned in communities from California to Connecticut.
Sam, when you look at some of the national security implications here, it's not just the domestic law enforcement. The CIA offered a different early retirement and resignation option. The CIA director said if an individual works on a high priority issue or has a specific language skill, they can't take the so-called buyout we've been talking about earlier in the program. They are trying to target these cutbacks in specific ways. Can you actually really do that? And is this a good idea?
Well, I think it depends the subjectivity of how you define national security. I would argue that all of the CIA counts as a critical national security position. But more broadly, Margaret, I worked for 3 presidents. They all had different approaches to the federal workforce. What concerns me with this administration's rapid elimination approach is that it creates a wildly uneven playing field with their adversaries. The KGB is not shedding agents. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not losing diplomats. What we have in this moment is tens of thousands of personnel taking the buyout, leaving their jobs. We have countless others on leave. We have others who are worried about taking certain assignments because of fear of retribution, or spending hours talking to family and lawyers about their professional options while being expected to do their day job. We don't have all hands on deck in a very dynamic threat environment. And longer term, I am concerned what this will do for recruitment to the federal government and redundancy. It takes years to train and equip a spy. It takes years to train an aid worker. So coming back from the talent cuts that we're seeing could have a generational impact.
And that the comparison was made early in the program. Oh, well, in the private sector, they do buyouts. Even in the private sector, people can say, hey, we lost some institutional knowledge or expertise here. You're saying American government, the taxpayer invested in that expertise, and that's what's being lost here.
And there's no quick fix switch to turn it back on. It'll be a longer term investment in getting talent back onto the field.
So, Chris, you know, in trying to whittle down who this applies to, who it doesn't, CBS has obtained an internal communication given out at Homeland Security. Employees were told anyone working for Customs and Border Patrol can't take the buyout, ICE, other immigration-related departments, TSA, you can't, FEMA, parts of it at least you can't, and the agency you used to run, CISA, was singled out. But then we're seeing conflicting reports that say very different things about parts of that agency being affected and dismantled. Cybersecurity is the new frontier for warfare, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what does this mean?
Well, it's not clear, right? Let's also step back a minute and recognize that President Trump in his first administration in 2018 established CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. That's the agency I ran. And to your point, the threat landscape is as active and dynamic as ever. And it's not as if we're all of a sudden unplugging systems today that we weren't doing 2 to 3 months ago. It's becoming more digitized, more connected, and the opportunity space for the bad guys is also increasing. Even during the campaign, the vice president's phone was accessed by Chinese threat actors. So we have this opportunity right now to continue to invest in our cybersecurity defenses. So the conversations I've had with CISA personnel is that they're going to hang on because the public service mission is so important to many of these individuals. It could be making millions in the cybersecurity industry, in the private sector. They are committed to getting through this, to continuing to protect the American people, American networks, the federal government. That's the opportunity.
Secretary Noem said CISA has gotten far off mission. How is that received?
Well, I think to Sam's point, every administration has a set of policies and priorities that they go in, they review. They sometimes do it rapidly, sometimes do it slowly. At the beginning of the Biden administration, Scott, as we were talking about, they took down or disassembled the Department of Justice China task force. China is obviously a huge threat. There are elements of CISA, the election security mission specifically, that was clearly spelled out in Project 2025 as a distraction, as something that's not core. And I will say that having worked with those people, they're American patriots, they're public servants. My hope is that as the administrative review process goes through, that they are provided opportunities to work elsewhere because they're effective and there are other things that we have to continue to be doing.
I want to drill down more, but I come back with everything these days, Jan, to the fundamental questions. Is this legal? As our legal expert, some of these buyouts are tied up in court.
Right.
Is it legal?
And we're going to have a hearing this week, tomorrow, on whether or not these pauses can remain. I think the judge is going to keep this pause in place. It's kind of putting it on hold, even though this is one of the weaker of all the lawsuits that's been filed against these many executive orders. The argument is that Trump just went about this the wrong way. So that's why it's different than when Bill Clinton cut over 200,000 jobs from the federal government when he was in office. He involved Congress. And that's a common theme with all of these lawsuits. And there are many, dozens and dozens from coast to coast, that these executive orders and doing these executive orders, Trump did it unilaterally, and he cannot do that. Like, he has to involve Congress, and he's usurping Congress's role. So whatever the judge does in this case on the buyouts, I think it does raise one interesting issue when you're talking about the impact on people and how some of these orders, as you guys were discussing, what about those 65,000 people who say they want those? They want to do this. They may have a claim now. They're relying on this. So that raises a whole nother legal issue if these buyouts cannot proceed. So all this is going to take some time to sort out. The courts right now are definitely putting up, yellow to red lights on a lot of these executive orders. But like our polling is showing, like this to me, regardless of whether these end up being legal losses, losses in the courts, they're political wins. It's a victory for Trump because he's showing that he's doing, as our polling reflects, what he promised in the campaign. Right. And so, regardless of how many of these end up surviving at the end of the day, Trump can still say this was a win for him politically. Right.
And we keep coming back to that, but it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. And that's what I think is so illuminating to hear from you all from inside the agencies. Scott, I want to come back to you because the Attorney General, Bondi, dissolved an FBI task force that worked to uncover covert efforts by Russia, China, Iran, and others to manipulate voters. There seems to be an effort to refocus the Justice Department. What's that focus?
There were some first-day orders when Pam Bondi arrived at Main Justice this week, including repurposing this foreign influence task force the FBI has, trying to shepherd its resources more towards drug cartels versus the ongoing kinetic foreign influence campaigns, which have been part of our country for some time now, right, that Chris knows quite well. I think their concern, though, is broader than just that task force. If there is a gutting of FBI personnel, either by giving them new jobs that aren't what they're there for or firing them, you can't just replace an FBI agent tomorrow. Right. It takes many months of training, background checks, polygraphs. They go to Quantico. It takes a long time to deploy, years to get them up to speed. And for a supervisor, we're told it takes 5 to 7 years to get somebody in place. That's something that goes beyond the Trump term.
Jan, on the legal question, Democrats are throwing around constitutional crisis as a phrase.
I don't see that yet. I mean, so far the president is not ignoring judicial orders.
So far,
right? And they're appealing them. They're, so I.
On the congressional consent portion, though, we're not. You did hear from Congressman McCall that, well, if it's in statute, that's another matter. You have to at least consult with Congress before you destroy an agency or dismantle it.
Right, and all of these executive orders raise similar legal issues, but they're different because they depend on what the law at issue actually says. So the USAID, trying to put those employees that you were talking about on administrative leave, I think there's about 3,000 of them. And then kind of the forced evacuation from their host countries. A very highly regarded federal district court judge here in D.C., a Trump appointee, put that on hold and pointed to a specific federal law that says that he has to consult Congress before you're going to dismantle or really kind of reorganize USAID. So that one, that's a pretty strong lawsuit right there. That's a strong one. But that judge also upheld part of Secretary Rubio's order that would freeze future funding of USAID projects. So a mixed bag.
Chris, quickly, on the national security questions of having these DOJ employees, which the White House says have security clearances and are only looking inside systems, read only. Is there a risk?
Well, theoretically, there are various risks associated with access to systems. You could have sensitive information, proprietary information. You could be plugging in systems that aren't necessarily clean or haven't gone through the normal protocols for access to these government systems. You could also see some of these folks getting targeted by Chinese or Russian actors for compromise, for extortion and exploitation. But the real, the opportunity that I'm looking for out of DOJ specifically is to radically transform government IT. We have to do it. It's been too long.
And we'll continue to track that. Chris Krebs, thank you, all of you. We'll be back in a moment. When the U.S. Agency for International Development sends assistance to countries around the world, the material is stamped with the agency's logo and its motto, "From the American People," so the recipients of our assistance know exactly who sent it. Today, the future of the agency is very much in doubt. President John F. Kennedy created USAID in 1961 as a way to exert American strength.
The people who are opposed to aid should realize that this is a very powerful source of strength for us.
64 years later, Elon Musk called those public servants criminals and said USAID must die. President Trump tasked him to go to work.
Look at all the fraud that he's found in this USAID. It's a disaster what the people, radical left lunatics, they have things that nobody would have even believed.
For shame! Shame
On Friday, the USAID signs were removed from outside the building named after President Ronald Reagan, who fiercely fought for foreign aid.
We aren't buying friends. We're helping friends.
We spoke with a 10-year veteran of USAID who asked to stay anonymous out of fear for their family members' safety.
Are people motivated by politics where you work?
Civil servants are, at their core, sworn to uphold the rules of our government, of our Constitution, and to serve each incoming administration. My personal politics don't play a role in us delivering small food packets to kids in Sudan that are literally hours away from dying.
A federal court will decide whether it is legal for a president to unilaterally dismantle an agency enshrined in law by Congress. Yet last week, 500,000 metric tons of food aid sat waiting in U.S. ports, with no workers able to unload or deliver it, complicating Secretary of State Marco Rubio's ability to unfreeze a few projects, like feeding the starving in Sudan and giving medication to AIDS patients.
Do you think there is a chance that these people with DOGE are doing what Donald Trump has said? The President of the United States has said they're increasing efficiency.
No, I don't. I respect our new Secretary of State. And when he took office, he said that he was going to do everything in his power to align U.S. foreign policy with making Americans stronger, safer, and more prosperous. I can tell you that every individual at USAID welcomes that conversation and welcomes that challenge, including myself.
It isn't clear why this sliver of spending, less than 1% of the federal budget, is the first focus of this so-called efficiency project. But it feels like a demolition, perhaps a preview of the future for other public servants.
Please pay attention to USAID. This might not affect you right now, but it will tomorrow.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.